Hello all, welcome back to Consciousness Rising. It's been quite a while since my last video. I've got quite a few planned as usual, but just so hard to find the time. But life's pretty good, I'm keeping myself fairly busy, doing lots and lots of client work, seeing lots of different people, lots of different experiences, and it's just all wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Life's a journey and a learning experience, and I learn something new every day, and I'm sure a lot of you do. Um, I want to make it clear actually that these videos, what I really endeavour to do is to make them quite different, and not. I try not to repeat myself too much. However, that's not. I do sometimes revisit certain themes. I've got one coming up soon on trauma, but I'm gonna break trauma down in a way that perhaps I've never done before. Talking about different types of trauma. So sometimes I'll revisit a theme, but I try very, very hard to respect the people that are watching this and don't keep banging on about the same things over and over again. I very much, respect people that are coming to this work of mine, and I know it's not for everyone, but this is something I've wanted to do for a long time. I've alluded to archetypes quite a few times. I think probably in my tarot videos, and there's a good reason for that, which I'll come to at the end of this video actually. But yeah, archetypes comes from Carl Jung, and it's all part of our collective unconscious. I think I have covered that a little bit, but this really, really is an introduction. I'm not going super deep on this. However, I just want to kind of put out, when you hear me talk, because I will use psychological phrases sometimes like archetypes or shadow or soul or anima. I want to put out a video that kind of contextualizes that and makes it clear what I'm talking about and what archetypes are. As I say, there's lots of stuff out there on this. I'm not, no means an expert. I'm learning just like other people are. One thing I will say about archetypes is once I came to understand archetypes, well, actually, firstly, the first thing I want to say is I've always really enjoyed art. Now, art is very, very important for psychological growth. But once I learnt about archetypes and really got used to that whole concept, I suddenly realised that I'd been using them and they've been manifested in me. And they do. And I also, can't really watch an art piece now without seeing them everywhere. They are literally part of our consciousness. So this really is an introduction video. I might revisit it in the future, but this is just a brief introduction to what archetypes actually are. So, a few bullet points here. What an archetype is it's actually a mental image. It's basically an image in your mind. I also have to say one thing as well, like when we talk about consciousness, I'll often use psychological terms like id, ego, superego, things like that come from the Freud school or archetypes from the Jungian school. They're not actually, one thing I want to make really clear is they're lenses to look at consciousness. There isn't a part of the brain that is the id, there isn't a part of the brain that is the superego and the ego. This is just a way of looking at consciousness, and a lot of people can't get their heads around that. People think too physically, and I'm not talking physically. I'm talking about consciousness, which goes beyond the physical. Physical is part of it. Oh yeah, I just wanted to make that clear. So, an archetype is a mental image, and it's a phylogenetic imprint of the past. They're all born from earthly experiences, so we've all had, mostly, unless situationally, we've all had mothers, fathers. We might know a wise old man. We might know a jester, a joker. These are all archetypes. They are racial in nature. I'm not going to go too heavily into that, but they are racial in nature. So, for instance, my version of an archetype will be to do with my race. If I'm manifesting the right one. If it's a different one, it might represent something else. If it's someone from the East, for instance, it might be representing a different type of archetype for me. But that's not one of my archetypes. The mine will be racial in nature, so they would be Western. Okay, there is a racial part of it. And what they basically are, as I've said there, is they're all of humankind's past imprinted in our psyche. So we carry, each one of us, we carry a personal unconscious, which is ours alone, our individual experience, but we also carry a collective unconscious, in which some part imprinted in our collective unconscious is all of humankind's past. We all carry that, which is quite amazing, and it's quite. Once you start to look in terms of this, you start to get a real understanding of, the past and where we've come from, where we're going. Um, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit more in my trauma video about that, because I've got some really interesting insights. So all of humankind's past is imprinted in our psyche. Each archetype is both, it has a dual aspect, so it is dark and light. So each have a sort of positive or negative. Okay, just like in the tarot. Suppression of an archetype will always lead them to becoming demonic. Now, I'm not going to go too far into that today, but if you really understand that concept and you look at society right now, it really opens your eyes. So, for instance, if an archetype of, let's say, the anima, if you suppress your anima, which I'll go on to talk about what the anima is in a minute, it will come back in a demonic form. Okay, so it has a dark side, which ultimately isn't always a bad thing. It's there to teach you a lesson, individually and collectively. So to suppress them is not a good thing, because they come back in a demonic form. And it's not something that's just in the past. We are constantly adding to the archetype reservoir in our everyday lives. More will be born every day. Memes are kind of a little bit like this. Because, for instance, I was thinking of this, and I actually love memes. I think they're really, really important, because comedy is important, and it's also in line with alchemy, turning darkness to light. And memes, you have the Karen meme now, don't you? I want to see your manager. Well, that's become an archetype almost now. So that's one that we've created. That's just kind of what I mean by that. So it's not something. This is an ongoing process. This is something that's ongoing all the time, just as time is. But what they actually are is their inner guides that can be worked with. I actually think sometimes when people are talking about spirit guides, they're not talking about spirit guides, they're talking about archetypes. But, that's a whole other area I'm not going to cover today. But, yeah, the inner guides, you can work with them. Inside you is a wizard, a magician, a warrior, a wanderer. All these different things, they're all inside us. And we can strengthen certain archetypes through working with them and recognising them. They're in art all the time. Film is a wonderful place to look for archetypes. And in fact, I did that, didn't I? I did the Lord of the Rings thing, and I did the shadow archetype in there. So there, and there, I'm just going to underpin that as well at the bottom there. We carry all of humanity's experience within our own minds. That is the collective unconscious. Which, to me, when I started to learn about that, was really fascinating, because you just understand things on a much deeper level, and you see that interconnectedness that we are. However, you will hear me talk about the importance of being an individual, because that is very, very important. Becoming healthy and whole, you can't do that as a collective as such. It starts at the individual level, but there is part of us that is connected to all things, and we carry all of humanity's experience within our minds. Okay, so there's lots of different schools of thought, but basically there are at least 13 archetypes. I almost guarantee there's way more than that, but there's at least 13. Okay, and Jung, he said that the most important of the archetypes are the anima, the animus, and the shadow. And anima, and I can't remember, I really should have put this in there, but that word actually does mean soul. So when he's talking about the anima, he's talking about soul, the soul of humankind. And down there on the bottom right, as I've often showed, I'm sure I've spoke about the persona and the ego before, the self in the middle, and behind that is the shadow, the bits we repress. As I've done videos on shadow work, go ahead and look at them. And beneath that, beneath the shadow is the animus and the anima. Okay, so these are what he considered to be, from all his studies, the most important. Okay. And just touching on the shadow a little bit, that basically what the shadow is it's all of mankind's experience of fear, disappointment, failure, and anxiety. It's all those negative, quote, emotions. They have given rise to it. all through our lives, and that's why we disassociate. We push things down into the shadow. It's sort of seen as a dumping ground by many, but I think it's a bit more than that. I think the shadow is part of us, and it shouldn't coming to terms with it and integrating it is actually really healthy. And I've done videos on that. And I've also done a video on why the body is important in that as well. But yeah, all of mankind's experience of fear, disappointment, failure, and anxiety have given rise to the shadow. This is a list of some. They're sometimes called other names, but basically, these are sort of like some of them. So you've got the innocent. We all and think about that as well. We all carry these inside ourselves because we've all had experience of these. The innocent, the orphan, the altruist, the wanderer, the warrior, the magician, the wild man, the sage, the hero. That's an important one, the hero. The anima, the animus, the shadow, and the spirit / God and self. I've put together there as one. They are one archetype. And yeah, in some books and different Jungians and different psychologists will sometimes call them different names, but that's kind of like a good example of what they're broken down into. There's more than that, as I say, but I just wanted to give a sort of brief list there. And they appear all the time. I mean, think about a film now. Think about, I don't know, maybe your favourite film is Star Wars or something. And actually, that's a whole other thought as well. I think a lot of the newer films, I think it was Thomas Sheridan, he's touched on this recently. A lot of people hate the new Star Wars films, and there's a reason for that, actually, because they're ruining these archetypes. So, for instance, in the original Star Wars trilogy, and I've there's been a time and a place in my life that I appreciated those films, especially like Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. The original trilogy I thought was fantastic, still do. The hero was Luke Skywalker, and he went through sort of shadow work, and the bit with Yoda and Dagobah where he goes into the cave and he faces himself, because the shadow is part of yourself. That was all really deep philosophy in there. But now, if you look at the new films, they've ruined him as a character. But, Thomas Sheridan says, and I kind of agree, that they're doing this deliberately. I actually do think they're destroying these positive archetypes. But yeah, it's actually healthy to, think about these things and think, when in life have I really needed that warrior energy inside me? When have I really felt like just being a wanderer? You see what I mean? Like, they're ways of looking at consciousness, and yeah. Okay, so very briefly, I'm going to explain what the animus and the anima are. The animus is the masculine energy in a woman, and it has things like courage, will, determination. Okay, I'm not talking about male, female here. I'm talking about masculine and feminine energies. In a bit like the yin yang. You can bring them together. A bit like when I talk about, I've showed the start in like the yin and yang. Well, yin and yang, like I just said, they need to be brought together. That's what enlightenment actually is. It's balancing of these forces within us. So the animus is the masculine energy in a woman. And so that means then that the anima is the feminine energy in a man. Empathy, compassion, creativity. So in a way, we're looking at right side, left side brain. It's similar, but not quite the same. This is on a bit of a deeper level, I think. But yeah, the anima is the feminine energy in a man. So, and this next slide, if you really get to grips with that and think about this statement here, animus and anima projection. Again, I'm not going to go into it at depth. So basically what happens is a man projects his own anima onto women, and a woman will project her animus onto men. That piece of information there will give you a huge insight into relationships. Right there. Think about that. Where have you met your own anima? Have you met your own animus? Do you project those parts of yourself onto other people and expect that of others? Is that what you're attracted to? I think it's a really interesting concept, but it happens a lot. So this is quite deep psychology, this. And I would highly recommend anyone, if you're wanting to get into Carl Jung's work. It's quite hard to read, some of it, but it's well worth it. I think, I can't remember which one I started with, but if you read the Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious, that is where a lot of this comes from. But yeah, Animus and Anima Projection. And lastly, I just want to tie this together with tarot as well, because I've got more videos coming on tarot, by the way. It's just, yeah, like I say, finding time for me is very difficult at the moment. But you know, the tarot is a perfect representation, especially the major arcana, of these archetypes. And I showed that. I think I showed that in the Lord of the Rings video with Gandalf and the Hermit card, and how similar they are. And I think Young did sort of touch on tarot and say that it was a very good representation to what he's talking about. So that's basically it. Yeah, I haven't gone super in depth here. I've just give this as a very introduction. But yeah, I hope you sort of find that useful. And then when you hear me talking about these terms, you'll kind of know. But if you look at the world through archetypes, even celebrities, I don't pay attention to any of that crap really, but they're all they are kind of archetypes, aren't they? A lot of them, or they're playing out one, maybe unconsciously a lot of the times. And one thing Michael Tsarian says was Hitler. He was possessed by an archetype. He was manifesting one. You know, so it's a very interesting concept, guys. But leave that with you to stew on, and hopefully, maybe sometime. I don't know if it'll be this week, maybe next week. I'll try and get my trauma video done, because that's going to bring a few things together that I've really been thinking about lately, and it might explain a few things. Yeah, take care, guys. See you in the next one.